holding a book or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Dan, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the Saturday-Sunday, May 2nd through 3rd, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Spirit to close as war strains airlines. A U.S. bailout falters as discount carrier bleeds cash and its bondholders balk. Spirit Airlines was preparing to cease operations after failing to strike a deal for a financial lifeline with the federal government, becoming the first U.S. airline casualty after President Trump's attack on Iran sparked a surge in jet fuel costs. Across the industry, airlines have been scrambling to deal with rising fuel costs that are threatening to add billions of dollars in unexpected extra expenses this year, and forcing carriers to raise fares and trim routes to hold the line on their billowing costs. Budget carriers like Spirit have been especially squeezed, but even heavyweights like Delta Airlines and the United Airline Holdings are trying to cope with a newly challenging business environment, while flyers face sticker shock over the prices for tickets and higher bag and other fees. Analysts, meanwhile, have peppered industry executives with questions about potential mergers, wondering if or when weaker carriers might get swallowed up. One of those weaker carriers appeared to be succumbing. Spirit, which helped pioneer the ultra-discount airline model in the U.S., had been hoping to finalize a $500 million lifeline from the government before running out of cash. But the discount carrier hasn't been able to get sufficient support between certain bondholders and the government to secure the funding to keep it in business, people familiar with the matter said. The airline was expected to cease operations early Saturday morning. Spirit had been in talks with the Trump administration about a deal that would have provided a cash infusion in exchange for warrants that could convert into a stake of up to 90% of the company. But there had been disagreements inside the Trump administration over whether and how to fund the bailout. And some Spirit bondholders dug in their heels against the deal, convinced it would have hurt them economically, the people said. Meanwhile, the airline was facing relentless cost pressure from higher fuel prices. Trump, a Republican, said at the White House Friday that though he would like to have the chance at saving Spirit's jobs, he would only agree to a deal with the company if, quote, it was a good deal. Absent the government bailout, Spirit has been running out of cash, and the airline was moving ahead with plans to wind down operations and liquidate its aircraft fleet, the people said. Spirit has spent much of the past year and a half in Chapter 11. The business model that once made it an industry maverick, bringing its brand of bargain basement fares coupled with fees for pretty much everything, faced pressure from more intense competition. The airline buckled after years of losses and a heavy debt load. It retrenched in recent months. The airline still has thousands of employees, but shrank its fleet to focus on operations in strongholds such as Detroit, Orlando, and Fort Lauderdale. As of February, Spirit accounted for about 3.9% of domestic air travel, according to aviation analytics company Cirium, down from 5.1% a year earlier. Spirit had continued to sell tickets in recent days as it worked to stave off its demise, including offers of deeply discounted fares. While travel demand has remained surprisingly resilient in the U.S., that won't be enough to insulate airlines from fuel shock. American Airlines Group has estimated that its fuel costs would jump by $4 billion and warned last week that it would lose money in 2026. United also slashed its profit outlook for the year and is now forecasting adjusting earnings per share of $7 to $11 compared with its prior projection of $12 to $14. Carriers from Air France to Cathay Pacific and Lufthansa are trimming routes in order to save on fuel costs. Spirit helped bring the ultra-discount model to the U.S. in 2006, mimicking the strategy Ryanair had adopted in Europe. At first, Americans were outraged at being nickeled and dimed for water and paper boarding passes, but they couldn't deny the allure of cheap tickets. Less than half a decade ago, Spirit was at the center of a bidding war between Frontier and JetBlue Airways. It went with JetBlue's higher offer and agreed to be acquired for $3.8 billion. But the Justice Department challenged the deal, arguing that an independent Spirit was better for competition and cost-conscious flyers. A federal judge agreed in 2024, blocking the deal. Spirit has since struggled to find a path forward. The company filed for Chapter 11 last August, several months after exiting a prior bankruptcy. Since then, it has been streamlining its operations, selling planes, and raising airfares. Other carriers have been preparing to pick up customers that Spirit no longer serves. American has implemented fare caps for economy tickets on nonstop routes that overlap with Spirit. And United is preparing to support Spirit customers and employees in the event of a shutdown, the company said. Surges in fuel prices have often been catalysts for airline industry shakeouts. In 2008, the shuddering global economy and soaring fuel prices helped push several airlines into bankruptcy. Longtime airline executives said they are pulling out the familiar playbook, raising fares and cutting flight schedules. JetBlue is combing through data to identify flights that won't bring in enough revenue to cover the cost of fuel, landing fees, and maintenance. This is a math exercise rather than a strategic exercise, JetBlue's president, Marty St. George, told analysts last month. Always our goal is to try to get the best margin we can get to. So if we see stuff that will not be contributing to that, we will certainly take action. Gas prices continue war-fueled increases by Justin Lehart. Americans are pouring a lot more money into their gasoline tanks than they were even a week ago. The average price for a gallon of regular gasoline was $4.39 on Friday, according to AAA, a jump of 33 cents over where it was a week earlier. That is an unusually large move. The only times in recent years when gasoline prices have shot up like that over 7 days were back in March, shortly after the Iran war began, and in March 2022, shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine. The U.S. is far more insulated than many parts of the world from the fallout in supplies from the Persian Gulf, but it is not immune from the effects of global supply shocks. Recent data show U.S. gasoline inventories falling at a quick clip. With it looking unlikely the Strait of Hormuz will reopen soon, and with the summer driving season approaching, supplies could tighten further in the weeks ahead. The 33-cent gain in the regular gasoline prices adds up. On a typical day, people in the U.S. pump about 375 million gallons of gasoline. So on Friday, they probably poured on the order of 125 million more into the tank than the Friday before. In some places, pain at the pump is even more acute. Several Great Lakes states where refinery issues have contributed to price gains stand out. Gasoline prices aren't at historical highs even by recent measures. In June 2022, the price of regular gasoline hit $5.07 a gallon. But the speed of the price jump is unprecedented. Friday's average price was $1.41 higher than 9 weeks earlier, right before the Iran war started. Energy Department data show that this is the highest 9-week price surge since at least the early 1990s. And underneath this article is a bar graph showing 1 week change in the price of gallon of gasoline. Ohio leads the list with a 92-cent change in price. Illinois follows with a 0.56 or 56 cents, I should say. The U.S. average follows after that at 33 cents. Then Florida at 31 cents. Pennsylvania at 29 cents. Texas at 28 cents. New York coming in 7th with 25-cent price increase. And California, the last on this list, at 18-cent price increase. Americans, this is back on the front cover, Americans become easy targets in nationwide surveillance dragnet by Shane Shiflett and Hannah Critchfield. Liz McClellan spent a morning in January witnessing the work of federal agents who had arrived in Maine to pursue the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. Like other community activists, protesters, and passersby around the U.S., McClellan took photos, including of an arrest. Then she followed a federal officer driving an unmarked vehicle to see where the agent was headed next. McClellan was surprised when the agent led her to her own house and blocked her driveway. Other federal officers quickly arrived, boxing in her car with their vehicles. "This is a warning," an agent told her, according to court records and video recording. "We know you live right here." In the battle against illegal immigration, the U.S. is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on tools that give federal agents easy access to the home and workplace addresses of American citizens, their social media accounts, vehicle information, law enforcement records, and other personal information, as well as data to track their daily comings and goings, the Wall Street Journal found. This newly expanded domestic surveillance system, a high-tech dragnet built to locate, track, and deport people residing illegally in the U.S., allows thousands of federal agents nationwide to peruse a trove of data belonging to more than 300 million people, including citizens. The government's tracking system relies on an amalgam of public and private information sifted, sorted, and packaged by contractors that include Palantir Technologies, Deloitte, Japanese conglomerate NEC, and smaller spyware specialists. The Department of Homeland Security has put these surveillance tools, facial recognition software, location tracking, and social media scrapers, once aimed largely at suspected terrorists and drug traffickers, in the hands of federal immigration agents who can identify, research, and track people by entering a name, license plate, or by simply taking a person's photo. The government surveillance system has advanced since the 9/11 terrorist attacks with the aid of artificial intelligence and the linking of government records with far-reaching commercial databases. It has been used against people whom the government alleged opposed or obstructed the immigration crackdown. As agents gain more powerful tools, including the ability to crack encrypted messaging apps and scan a person's WhatsApp and Reddit, department limits on their use are shrinking, according to interviews and a journal review of DHS policy documents. Privacy experts and former department employees say the administration is aggressively interpreting existing rules and ignoring limits set by prior administrations. The immigration crackdown is testing the legal and ethical boundaries of citizen surveillance and privacy rights, according to former department officials. In addition to McClellan, 48 years old, at least 4 other Maine residents say they were singled out and threatened after observing the work of federal agents. According to court records, 2 of the people in a continuing civil rights lawsuit accused DHS of unlawfully using their license plates and biometric data to track and intimidate them for exercising their First Amendment rights. DHS says it operates in full accordance with the law. The retaliation we've seen against Americans who choose to lawfully record DHS activities should alarm everyone, says Rush Atkinson, a former Justice Department attorney who is representing the 2 people in the case. This is a fundamental First Amendment right, and the public has the right to know why the government is collecting data on those who peacefully protest. With the backing of Congress and President Trump, DHS spent a record $425 million on surveillance tech in the past year, a 17% increase from the prior year. Federal spending is on pace to set another record in 2026, according to an analysis of federal contract data by the Journal. DHS received $191 billion for immigration enforcement in last year's One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Some Democratic lawmakers have questioned the department's use of surveillance technology, including cell phone hacking tools. In response to those concerns, the DHS Inspector General announced in February an investigation into the department's collection of biometric data. Civil rights groups and others have filed 4 federal lawsuits alleging the department's use of surveillance tools to revoke visas and arrest immigrants without warrants, or to threaten bystanders observing federal agents were all violations of the Constitution. DHS denied wrongdoing in those cases. Enforcing immigration law is essential to protecting America's national security, public safety, and economic strength, DHS said in response to questions. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is responsible for tracking more than 7 million immigrants, including those ordered out of the U.S., released from detention, or who await an immigration court hearing, DHS said. We do, of course, monitor and investigate and refer all threats, assaults, and obstructions of our officers to the appropriate law enforcement, DHS said. Our law enforcement methods follow the U.S. Constitution. I'd like to pause here to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Who's Who? Continuing with this article. Who's Who? Palantir is the top beneficiary of DHS's stepped-up spending on deportation and surveillance work. According to a journal review of government records, contracts, documents describing privacy concerns, and people familiar with the matter. Palantir quadrupled its DHS contracts to $81.3 million after Trump's return to the Oval Office last year, largely for work linking data streams for use in immigration enforcement. The department in February signed a 4-year, $1 billion blanket agreement that allows for continuing work from the Miami-based data analysis company. Last year, DHS paid Palantir $30 million to put a broad span of information about individuals into an app on agents' smartphones, allowing them to plot the location of people in the U.S. The app, known as Enhanced Leads Identification and Targeting for Enforcement, or ELITE, E-L-I-T-E, lets officers research and track individuals based on criminal history, license plate searches, name, date of birth, or location. The results display on a map or as a list, according to ICE agents. The app pulls from a variety of government databases, including information compiled by private investigators known as skip tracers, who track the current addresses of individuals. Our work is focused on the address fidelity of non-citizens, a Palantir spokeswoman said. An ICE agent during court testimony last year compared ELITE, that E-L-I-T-E, to Google Maps. Targets appear as pins on a map, clustered around addresses where immigrants, including lawful permanent residents, are likely to live, court records show. Through the year, beginning in January 2025, the U.S. paid consulting firms, including Deloitte, $130 million to aid ICE's deportation efforts and law enforcement support work. New consultant contracts call for analysts to monitor people on social media, identify threats, and create dossiers about people who make them. DHS awarded $15 million to tech company Celebrate for forensic tools to unlock phones and extract call logs, GPS location data, text messages, deleted photos, contacts, and email addresses. Also, DHS documents show. CBP renewed agreements with vehicle forensics firm Beria to retrieve data, including travel history, from the vehicles of suspects. Last year, DHS reactivated a $2 million contract with the U.S. subsidiary of Israeli spyware company Paragon Solutions, which makes Graphite, a hacking tool that can infiltrate encrypted messaging apps such as Signal and WhatsApp. ICE agents can access vehicle information and travel history from databases that collect information from electronic license plate readers installed on highways and at the U.S. border. DHS paid $20 million last year to data brokers, including Thomson Reuters and LexisNexis, which said its tools aren't used for monitoring. Nearly $21 million went to companies that track and identify targets with biometric technology. That included $8 million to NEC or NEC for a facial recognition algorithm that identifies passengers boarding planes. DHS deployed an app last year that lets agents identify people from images using NEC technology. DHS also expanded its use of Clearview AI, another facial recognition database which contains more than 70 billion photos. NEC, which for years has aided airport screening for CBP, processed photo images of roughly 200 million travelers, according to congressional testimony. We provide technology in accordance with U.S. law and contractual agreements, a NEC spokesperson told the Journal. In March last year, DHS deployed Mobile Fortify, an app that allows agents to point their phone camera at a person's face and retrieve names, birth dates, citizenship, or immigration status, and information about family members, government documents show. Around that time, DHS officials deleted policy memos that limited the use of facial recognition in its investigations, said former department officials. DHS archived and later restored mention of a policy saying the government can't investigate people lawfully protesting government activities. One DHS staffer who worked last year in the office that developed policies on border and immigration practices said even his team wasn't sure what the agency's rules were. DHS policies governing facial recognition and face capture technologies remain unchanged, the department said. In October, Miramar Martinez, en route to a Chicago church to donate clothes, saw an unmarked vehicle she suspected was carrying federal agents. She called out a warning to residents in Spanish, "La migra, la migra." Martinez, a 31-year-old teaching assistant, had no clue she was under government watch. Federal agents knew Martinez had reshared a Facebook post, ostensibly identifying an immigration officer's personal YouTube account. Within a day of her sharing the post, CBP circulated her name and photo with a warning to agents. Martinez, a U.S. citizen, was a potential threat. She was following the unmarked vehicle and shouting her warning less than a week after she drew the government's scrutiny. The two vehicles collided. Officers got out and the driver, a Border Patrol agent, shot her 5 times. Martinez, who survived her injuries, was called a domestic terrorist by DHS officials. She was charged with assaulting an officer by using her car as a weapon, a felony crime that carries a maximum prison sentence of 20 years. Martinez said the car-carrying agent sideswiped her. "I was a month away from paying off my truck, and I would never intentionally damage my vehicle, much less be crazy enough to hit law enforcement officers," she said at a congressional hearing in February. The government moved to drop its case a month after the shooting, and the judge dismissed the charges. Martinez would have bullet scars for life, she said at a congressional hearing, but perhaps even worse, the mental scars will always be there as a reminder of the time my government attempted to execute me. Democrats Court Wall Street Donors by Brian Schwartz and John McCormick. The 2028 Democratic presidential primary race won't begin in earnest until after November's midterm elections, but speed dating is well underway among prospective candidates and major donors on Wall Street and elsewhere. Senator Mark Kelly, a Democrat from Arizona, former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, and Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro are among those who have already met with wealthy investors and financiers in recent months. The flirtations are risky. Wall Street and wealth are viewed with great suspicion among many of the progressives likely to play a significant role in picking the party's nominee, and taxing the rich and bashing capitalism have become a rallying cry for many of them. Wall Street has nonetheless long been a significant source of money for the party, and that will continue to be the case in this year's midterm election and in 2028. With no clear standard bearer, many Democrats anticipate a crowded primary field that could grow as large as, if not larger, than the 2019-2020 lineup of more than 24 candidates. And potential 2028 contenders are looking for early advantages. The early meetings with donors are happening quietly, including over meals near Wall Street and in Midtown conference rooms. They are also playing out in Silicon Valley and other U.S. wealthy centers. Some power players in the finance and business world are putting together a new Wall Street-heavy donor group to hold private listening sessions with potential candidates, according to people familiar with the matter. Centerview Partners co-founder Blair Efron, Joshua Steiner, a partner at investment firm SSW Partners, former Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner, who is now chairman of the private equity firm Warburg Pincus, Blackstone Vice Chairman Tom Needs, and former Oracle President Charles Phillips are among the executives who are part of the group, the people said. One of the goals for some of the organizers is for a younger generation of financiers to have the chance to meet with candidates and for them to potentially help raise campaign cash. The group has been meeting since late last year to discuss the 2028 Democratic field. Efron, a long-time bridge between Wall Street and the Democrats, has played a central fundraising role in multiple presidential elections. Emanuel, who has had his own stints working for Wall Street, including becoming a senior advisor at Centerview after returning to the U.S. in 2025 from his Japan ambassadorship, has been among the potential presidential contenders engaging with longtime business community acquaintances about a bid. During the first half of April, Emanuel huddled with 4 veteran investors to make his case for a potential presidential run. Over boxed lunches in a Midtown office, he noted that favorability ratings for President Trump and Republicans have tumbled in recent polling. That discontent, he said, could provide an opening for a more moderate voice like his to unite Democrats and defeat the Republican nominee. Among those at the lunch, hedge fund manager John Petrie and Boykin Curry, former managing director at the investment firm Eagle Capital. Petrie, whom Emanuel said he first met about 3 months ago, is a Democratic donor who has backed former Vice President Kamala Harris and numerous House and Senate candidates in allied committees. John Petrie reached out to me and said, "I love what you are saying about education. Would you meet?" Emanuel, a longtime party fundraiser, recounted. He said, of the donors he met with for lunch, "I'm the only person they haven't contributed to." Petrie and Curry confirmed the meeting. The former White House Chief of Staff and Congressman has also spoken with Avenue Capital CEO Mark Lazary, someone he has been close to for more than 2 decades, about possibly running for president, a person with direct knowledge of the matter said. Emanuel, who is flooding his party with proposals as he seeks to influence the Democratic policy debate, has called for, among other things, a mandatory retirement age of 75 for presidents, cabinet officials, members of Congress, and federal judges. Kelly, a former astronaut, sat down recently for a dinner in New York with a party fundraiser and attorney who specializes in corporate bankruptcies, according to a person familiar with the matter. His message was clear. He is seriously considering running for president in a field that is likely to be sizable. A Kelly spokesman pointed to his past remarks about contemplating a presidential bid and declined to comment further. The dinner, on the sidelines of Reverend Al Sharpton's National Action Network convention, is the sort of meeting most of the prospective candidates will need to have in the coming months to build early support for presidential bids likely to be announced during the first half of 2027. Beshear said in a meeting with a Chicago-based Democratic fundraiser that he believes the 2028 election needs to feature Democrats who better appeal to middle-class voters, adding that candidates need to have concrete policies that can improve people's lives, according to the person who met with him. The fundraiser, a securities lawyer, said Beshear didn't rule out running for president. Beshear has political cover for ramping up his donor meetings. He is this year's Democratic Governors Association chairman, and one of that job's primary roles is to raise money for his party's 2026 race for governor. A Beshear aide declined to comment. Shapiro also met with Lazary last year, a person familiar with the matter said. An aide to Shapiro, who recently published a new memoir ahead of a possible presidential bid, declined to comment. Like Beshear, Shapiro has potential reasons besides 2028 to increase his meetings with donors. He is up for re-election this year in a large and costly state and is also working to help other Pennsylvania Democrats running for office. One potential 2028 Democratic presidential candidate who might not have to court big donor money is Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. The billionaire, an heir to the Hyatt hotel fortune, is running for a 3rd term this year and spent more than $300 million to to self-fund his first two gubernatorial campaigns. Aides didn't respond to requests for comment. The talks among wealthy Democratic donors about the state of the 2028 race were top of mind earlier this year during the Democratic National Committee's spring donor retreat in Park City, Utah, according to an attendee. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Moving on to another front page article, this one below the fold. Incoming Air Force One to retain Qatari frills by Marcus Weisgerber. When the Qatari royal family acquired a luxury jet for its private fleet more than a decade ago, the Boeing 747 was outfitted with the lavish furnishings and ornate ornaments that would befit one of the world's wealthiest families. Now, as the jumbo jet is expected to become Air Force One this summer, officials said the plane's lavish interior will look remarkably similar. The jet has undergone a $400 million overhaul to prepare it for the president. Those modifications, however, haven't centered on aesthetics, but rather top-secret communications gear that would enable the commander-in-chief to run the country from the skies. Alterations to the interior are focused on removing the Arabic language exit signs and the contemporary artwork once enjoyed by the Qatari royals. But the oversized leather seats, plush couches, and even the faux library bookcases are all staying, albeit with U.S. presidential seals now affixed to the walls, officials said. The description is the first public accounting by the Air Force on its efforts to overhaul the Boeing 747 as the president's new ride. By and large, the airplane that we're getting is in the same condition from an interior perspective, General Dale White, the four-star Air Force officer tasked with a high-profile project last year, said in an interview. The luxury jet was gifted to the U.S. by the Qatari government last year after President Trump complained that the planes he was required to fly on as president were too old and small. Trump's willingness to accept the jet as a gift from a foreign power raised a number of ethical and security concerns, including by some conservative allies. Trump said he would be stupid to turn it down. Trump didn't provide the Air Force direction on the interior, Air Force officials said, although the president did select the red, white, and blue design that will be painted on the exterior. Officials said a firm timetable on delivery hasn't been set. The plane hasn't completed flight testing, though, and is expected to arrive at Joint Base Andrews outside of Washington, D.C. this summer. The plane's posh interior will be notably more opulent than the current Air Force One, which is known for its smaller, dated domestic business class seats and utilitarian conference rooms. The level of detail that the foreign nations put into their head of state airplanes are very different than the approach that the United States uses, which is a lot more utility-focused, White said. Air Force officials stressed that security was a paramount concern. This is going to be an airplane that's going to carry the President of the United States, White said. We did not take any shortcuts as it relates to making sure security was exactly what it needed to be. Trump, a Republican, has taken a keen interest in buying new jets to serve as Air Force One since his first term in the White House, keeping a model of the new aircraft in the Oval Office. The two current Boeing 747s used for the Air Force One are nearly 40 years old, entering service during the administration of then-President George H.W. Bush. They are expensive to operate and break down more frequently. Around the time Trump was reelected in 2024, Air Force officials began researching operations for acquiring a plane that would serve as an interim Air Force One. The Air Force identified 10 Boeing 747-8s in a VIP configuration, a service official said. None was in the U.S. The Qatari plane was one of the planes on the list. In February 2025, Trump toured the Qatari plane in Palm Beach, Florida, near his Mar-a-Lago club. By May of that year, the Trump administration had entered into talks with the Qatari government about acquiring the plane as a gift, a move that raised legal and ethical concerns. After the Qataris transferred the plane to the Air Force in May 2025, it was then flown to L3 Harris Technologies facility in Texas. There, the interior was then taken apart to ensure there were no bugs or spying technology hidden inside, Air Force officials said. White and other Air Force officials declined to give specifics of how the plane was swept for threats. L3 Harris did the majority of modification work, while Boeing provided technical assistance as the original manufacturer. Officials said the decision to retain the interior was aimed at keeping the modification costs down and getting it done quickly. Changes to the interior would have required custom orders, and the Federal Aviation Administration would then need to certify the aircraft. Our ultimate customer gave us flexibility not to focus on the aesthetic pieces, White said. Two Boeing 747s, still under contract to become the next full-time Air Force One, have in part been delayed because of issues with creating custom interiors. The company doing the original interior work went bankrupt in 2021. I cannot understate the complexity and engineering involved in setting up the interiors for a head-of-state type airplane, White said. The current two Air Force One 747s have some capabilities the new Qatari jet won't. The Qatari plane has fewer refrigerators than the existing planes, meaning other aircraft flying with it might have to carry the president's food. Installing the additional refrigerators would have been significant engineering undertaking, according to an Air Force official. The plane will have one set of its own air stairs, which would be used in locations that don't have commonly used truck-mounted air stairs. Unlike the current Air Force One, which has a dedicated press cabin, the media seating arrangements will be different on the Qatari plane. Since the building walls would have delayed the delivery of the plane, the press seating will be separated from staff seats by a thick curtain, the Air Force official said. Also, the new Qatari jet won't be able to fly Golden Eagle missions, the name given to flights carrying the remains of a former president on board. White said that limitation is the result of officials opting not to install larger doors in the rear of the aircraft. The result is that if a former president dies before one of the two new Air Force One jets are built, the remains would be flown aboard one of the existing two Air Force One 747s. How a MAHA, that's M-A-H-A, Make America Healthy Again, hero lost the nomination. Vaccine stance costs Surgeon General nominee means crucial GOP backing, by Liz Esley White. Casey Means, nominated last year to be Surgeon General, was making a last-ditch attempt to win over Senator Lisa Murkowski on a phone call Monday. But Means found it difficult to get the senator to focus on her Make America Healthy Again message about the burden of chronic disease in America, she said. Instead, the Alaskan Republican asked whether she had fully vaccinated her infant son, Means said. I felt that it was extremely inappropriate, Means said. I told her that sharing my family's personal health information was absolutely out of the scope of this conversation. A Murkowski spokesman said the senator doesn't disclose the contents of private conversations. 3 days later, as it became clear Means didn't have enough support in the Senate for confirmation, President Trump announced on Truth Social that he had a new Surgeon General nominee and thanked Means for her service. It was the end of a year-long journey for Means, a Stanford graduate who dropped out of her surgical residency to pursue holistic medicine. Now her nomination's failure is prompting barbs on social media as Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. blames Senate Health Committee Chairman Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana, for delays that doomed Means. It has also put front and center some senators' unease with MAHA's vaccine skepticism and the White House's attempt to manage the issue. A text message reviewed by the Wall Street Journal makes clear that White House staffers didn't initially press urgently for Means to have a hearing. Not going to burn Capitol on Casey, a senior White House legislative affairs staffer in October told a Senate staffer working to schedule her confirmation hearing in a text message reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. The text message referred to not wishing to push for a virtual hearing amid the last days of Means' pregnancy and wasn't about her nomination, senior White House officials said. The White House reversed course and urged a virtual hearing to be scheduled quickly, people close to the committee and senior White House officials said. The reversal came after Kennedy got involved, people close to the committee said. Delivering on the MAHA agenda and restoring gold standard science and health policy making are top priorities for President Trump, and these priorities are in large part why he has nominated Casey Means for the position of U.S. Surgeon General, said White House spokesman Kush Desai, adding that the White House pushed her confirmation. Means' downfall has left Kennedy without a Surgeon General. He recently called her the most articulate, eloquent, and erudite evangelist for his movement. Her fans, including Kennedy, are blaming senators and special interests for her downfall, while her critics are expressing relief that Trump's pick to replace her, Nicole Saphier, has voiced support for the measles and COVID-19 vaccines. There are many in D.C. that are not looking for an outspoken, innovative disruptor to be the nation's doctor, Means said. The Surgeon General wields a bully pulpit for health advice and helps oversee the U.S. Public Health Service with 6,000 public health professionals. Means came to the Trump campaign's attention as the co-author of the book Good Energy. Campaign staff passed her book around about healthy eating that she wrote with her brother Callie, now a top Kennedy aide stationed in the White House. Trump named her as Surgeon General pick as early as May of 2025 after pulling Jeanette Neishawatt's nomination. Trump didn't submit her nomination to the Senate until June. It took another month for her to receive ethics and background check forms, she said. That was due to a backup, as the White House Personnel Office, a White House official, said. She filed them in early August, but ethics officials had a series of questions. The Senate Health Committee didn't receive her paperwork until September, people familiar with the matter said. At that point, 7 months pregnant, Means said she had only a few weeks before her doctor advised her not to fly in an airplane. Democrats and Republicans on the committee then had a long series of questions about her medical license, eligibility for the role, and ethics paperwork, people close to the committee said. In mid-October, a GOP committee staffer was working to schedule her virtual confirmation hearing, but was going to have to press Democrats to accomplish it, people close to the committee said. That's when he received the text from the White House staffer saying they didn't want to burn political capital on Means. Then a couple of days later, the staffer got a call from the White House with a new instruction making clear that Kennedy had gotten involved and the administration wanted to push hard for a hearing, the people said. The White House throughout the fall was less enthusiastic about Means than Kennedy, people familiar with that matter said. Senior White House officials denied that. The committee scheduled her for a virtual hearing in late October. On her due date, we couldn't help but feel that this was gamesmanship, Means said. It was the soonest date possible based on committee rules, people close to the committee said. Means went into labor the day of the hearing, and it was postponed until February. Means, at her hearing in February, attempted to focus on chronic diseases. But some Republicans on the committee who had voted to confirm Kennedy, including Senator Cassidy, had become critical of the health secretary's actions on vaccines, and inquiries about immunizations dominated the hearing. Means told senators that she thinks vaccines save lives, but declined to promise that she would recommend measles and flu shots for children. She also declined to say that vaccines don't cause autism. In the following weeks, it became clear to health department officials that concerns from Senators Murkowski and Susan Collins, Republican from Maine, would sink Means' nomination. Cassidy remained mum publicly. Means said the chairman refused to meet with her, despite repeated requests. Cassidy's spokesman said his office had no record of meeting requests. A spokesman for Collins didn't comment. By March, there was no obvious path through the Senate for her to be confirmed. But Maha's advocates continued to urge Trump to back her, including in an Oval Office meeting with the president. Means had last-minute calls with Murkowski and Collins Monday. Murkowski recently told an administration official she wouldn't vote for Means, a person familiar with the matter, and a Murkowski spokesman said. By sabotaging this appointment, Bill Cassidy once again did the dirty work for entrenching interests seeking to stall the Maha movement, Kennedy wrote on X. A post from the Senate Health Committee deflected blame for the failed nomination, saying it was clear that Means didn't have the votes. Looking at some world news, Zambia assisted pollution cover-up by Nicholas Barrio. Saddled by billions in debt owed to Beijing, the Zambian government helped a Chinese-owned mining giant cover up one of the worst mining pollution incidents in the country's history, according to an investigation by a House Select Committee on China. More than a year after a tailings dam owned by Sinometals collapsed and unleashed toxic sludge into the Kafue River, farmlands along the river valley are scorched. Hundreds of people lack a source of clean drinking water, and residents continue to live on a land contaminated with heavy metals. Zambia, which owes $6.6 billion to the Beijing and Chinese lenders, hasn't pressed Sinometals over the disaster, fearing retaliation from China, the committee said in a report reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. Sinometals is a subsidiary of a state-owned China non-ferrous mining. The committee established, among other things, that high-ranking government officials have often traveled to China since the disaster to solicit more investment. The Zambian government colluded with Sinometals to ignore warnings from its own regulators about the risks at the company's tailings dam, suppressed an independent probe, and intimidated civil society organizations to prevent them from speaking with victims of the pollution, the committee said. The Chinese embassy in Zambia couldn't be reached for comment. A spokesman for Sinometals didn't comment. Zambia's presidential spokesman declined to comment. Zambia's information minister, Cornelius Mwitwa, has described the debt position with China as a partnership, not debt trap diplomacy. Starting around 2012, Zambia borrowed heavily from China to finance infrastructure projects. Many projects stagnated or took time to generate revenue amid low global metal prices. As hundreds of residents fight for compensation from Sinometals through several lawsuits in Zambian courts, the government allowed the company to restart operations in February. Today, the mine's poorly maintained dams still loom over frightened victims, their lawyers said. Benson Zimba, a Zambian environmental activist, said a soft approach by the government towards Sinometals risks emboldening Chinese mining companies to flout environmental laws. We owe China money, but that doesn't mean we should let them destroy our country. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Turning to the opinion section, How Not to Respond to Political Violence, Declarations by Peggy Noonan. I don't think we fully appreciate how much the country is descending into political violence. We aren't seeing the speed and pitch of the descent. It is an amazing and little noted fact that at least 4 cabinet secretaries in the second Trump administration, including the heads of the state and defense departments, have reportedly had to live on military bases because of the number and severity of the threats against them. One top staffer to the president is also known to be so situated, as is the Army Secretary and one other unnamed official. This is all unprecedented in scale. People who work for presidents have always lived in houses in Northern Virginia or the District of Columbia. They haven't had to live surrounded by U.S. troops. None of this is normal, but then the appearance at the home of a Supreme Court justice of a man with a gun is abnormal. Brett Kavanaugh, June 2022. As is the campus assassination of a prominent conservative activist, Charlie Kirk, September 2025. Or the 3 known attempts on the life of President Trump, July and September 2024, April 26. We have entered a new dark time, and we have to think more about how we publicly handle assassinations and attempted assassinations. There's no reason to believe we're going to see fewer of them. We are a country with a long history of political violence, a country with 330 million people, more than that many guns, and a mental health crisis. I am thinking very much of what we show on our screens as we act out our roles in the drama. In terrible moments, we should keep in our minds these thoughts. Don't inflame things. Don't make them hotter and more dramatic. This gets us to last Saturday night and the would-be assassin at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. The security failures surrounding that evening have been covered elsewhere. Those immediately guarding the president seem to be hardy and quick. But the peripheries of such events are a continuing problem. My concern is how we react publicly, what's on the screens. Granted that everyone was at least a little shaken, and in such circumstances, people often suffer from what Tom Wolfe called information compulsion. You can't stop talking. Still, the president shouldn't have held a news conference after almost being shot, because he never knows what he's going to say, and members of the media never know what they're going to ask. Also, there are a lot of young reporters covering the White House, and they have energy and ambition, but lack deep judgment and wisdom, and they don't know history in a way that prompts them to see its healthier templates. Questions were asked in the news conference and in the roughly 24 hours after that it did no good to ask, why do you think this keeps happening to you? I am no longer willing to permit a pedophile, rapist, and traitor to coat my hands with his crimes. What's your reaction to that? Guys, You can't, immediately after the event, ask an American president to parse and consider the rants of his would-be killer, to chatter on about why someone would want to shoot him. Part of the reason is that any future would-be shooter watching will be thinking like this. I can try to kill a president, and then my thoughts can fill his mind, and everyone considers my historically important opinions. Everyone talks about me and my genius, and I'm a somebody. I move mountains. I shoot presidents, and this is worth it. I am finally understood and is a world historic figure. Assassins are delusional. Delusional people think they're extremely significant and should be item one in the national consciousness. We are losing our judgment about what should be said and can't be said. We need to go back to a little terseness. Imagine it like this. It is late in the evening of April 15th, 1865, and Abraham Lincoln has survived an assassination attempt, the bullet aimed by John Wilkes Booth having merely nicked his now bandaged scalp. Lincoln meets with the press in the Red Room. Horace Greeley, the old warhorse of the New York Tribune, bores in. Mr. President, this is the second known time someone has tried to shoot you. Why do people keep trying to kill you? Booth is reported to have screamed, "Sic semper tyrannis," as he jumped from the balcony. Mr. President, why do you think people think you are a tyrant? The unflappable Lincoln might have been a little nonplussed. Such questions would have constituted a serious breach in human decorum. But then again, Greeley wouldn't have asked him, and Lincoln wouldn't have called a news conference, because he'd have known sometimes reporters ask the kinds of questions that seem inane but are an excitement to the unstable. All that is needed in such circumstances is that a leader do a 4-minute taped or live statement saying he's fine. Everyone's fine. Law enforcement apprehended the shooter. The Secret Service were brave. Life continues apace. After such a terrible moment, the congressional leadership of both parties should appear on screen together and in simple terms reject violence. Make one thing clear. Political assassination is a particularly grave crime because it is an attempt to kill democracy itself. The people elect their representatives, but their assassin says, "No, only my vote counts. I annul your collective choice." That is an assault on the constitutional order. We will not have it. When something like the Correspondents' Dinner happens, everyone goes to his corner and points a finger outward. The violence is coming from the right. No, it's coming from the left. It isn't a pointless argument, but those engaged in it tend to be on the one side or the other, and getting hate mail and threats from the opposite side, and that tells them that it's the other side that is the devil. My own sense is that in recent years both sides threaten violence, but the left is now more likely to act on it. And truly all now should be aware of a rising spirit of Luigi Mangioniism, of the belief that the system is so vicious and corrupt that violence is justifiable, that those who rise to the top in spheres such as the business and politics, well, they have it coming. Just about every major CEO in America has private security now. They didn't used to. Even 10 years ago, they didn't. It is sick and terrible that they do now. I end with this thought. Since at least the turn of the century, our young people have been told endlessly in school, in media, that they will never have a nice life. The rising seas will drown them. A racist, misogynistic culture will abuse them. The economy can no longer make a place for them. If it is relentlessly drilled into you that you'll never have a satisfying and constructive life, and you are 22 years old and your brain isn't fully developed yet, you just might think it wholly legitimate that you indulge your fury and strike at those who have thwarted you. Maybe we want to change the emphasis to there are reasons to live, and you are not doomed, and you have a place here. And finally, we'll end with this. Where are all the Americans in American college tennis by Patrick McEnroe? I was watching the Southeastern Conference Men's Tennis Championship a couple of weeks ago. Of the 12 players on the court, 2 were American. Curious, I checked the Atlantic Coast Conference's men's final for American players and found only one, Across 2 championships among the highest levels of college tennis, only 3 of 24 singles players were American. That's more than a statistic, it's a signal. I say that as someone who came up through the system, I was a top junior, a very good college player, and a decent professional. My parents saw tennis not simply as a sport, but as a pathway to an education. That model is changing fast. Basic financial pressures are a factor. Last week, the University of Arkansas announced it's cutting its men's and women's tennis programs, but larger forces are at work. Over the past 2 decades, the share of American players among incoming Division I tennis freshmen has fallen from roughly 70% to 40%, according to Racket magazine. National Collegiate Athletic Association data show that about 64% of men's Division I tennis players and 61% of women's players are international, the highest proportion of non-U.S. athletes in any collegiate sport. These shifts reflect deeper changes in college athletics. Start with incentives. In most athletic departments, football and men's basketball generate the revenue. Other sports, including tennis, operate under pressure to produce results quickly. Add name, image, and likeness opportunities and transfer portal, and the equation changes further. Factors in coaches, too, who are rewarded for immediate performance, not long-term development. The most reliable way to win under these conditions is to recruit players who are already developed. That often means going global, bringing in older, more experienced players ready to contribute immediately. Over time, this has created a meaningful age and experience gaps, with some players reaching their mid-20s by the time they are upperclassmen. None of this is an argument against international players. They have long strengthened college tennis and raised the level of competition. But it does raise a question of balance. When roster competition shifts this dramatically, the implications extend beyond who is on the court. They affect who has access to the system in the first place. For decades, college tennis served as a bridge for American players, those not ready to turn pro at 18, but still capable of developing a high level. It was a place where potential could be cultivated. College sports have long been a pathway not only to professional opportunity, but also to a personal growth, discipline, and self-control. Sports fosters communal connection, which, for most participants, matters as much as winning. If the pathway narrows, where do players go for that experience? There is also a longer-term effect. Conversations with families and junior players suggest the pipeline is already under strain. Even highly ranked American juniors are finding fewer opportunities to earn playing roles on college teams. Players who once expected to contribute as players in colleges are now competing simply to make lineups. For families weighing the significant time and financial investment required to pursue high-level junior tennis, the calculating is also shifting. If the college pathway appears diminished, the incentive to pursue it weakens. To be sure, increased competition can benefit elite players. Competing against older and more experienced opponents can accelerate development. Recent American professionals such as Ben Shelton, Emma Navarro, and Peyton Stearns have emerged from strong college environments. But a system that works primarily for the top tier is less a development system than a sorting system. That distinction points to a larger question. Are college sports primarily about winning, functioning as a type of professional system whose output is measurable in short-term results? Or are they meant to be part of an educational experience in which teaching and development still matter? If the goal is purely competitive success, the current trajectory is understandable. But if college athletics are also meant to develop athletes over time within an educational framework, then some recalibration is needed. Policies that reward multi-year development, encourage roster stability, and address discrepancies in age and eligibility could help restore balance without undermining competition. I have generally been wary of quota systems. Open competition raises the level for everyone. But if incentives and structural adjustments aren't enough to restore balance, then more direct measures, such as limits on roster composition, may need to be considered. The question is whether the system is serving its purpose, and whether it provides the kind of opportunity that once made college athletics a pathway to both education and advancement for players like me. If the answer is no, incremental adjustment may not be enough. More far-reaching reforms may be needed. Mr. McEnroe, a former professional tennis player, was All-American at Stanford in 1986, 87, and 88. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the May 2nd and 3rd, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition. We read from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition every Monday at 7 a.m. Your reader has been Dan. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings 24 hours a day of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which